All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to tackle a shared and, yeah, often incredibly painful experience, ghosting. We're going to use our source material to deconstruct this, not as some kind of profound personal mystery or a deep moral failure, but as a predictable human system. By the end of this, you'll see exactly why they disappeared, and more importantly, why it has absolutely nothing to do with you.
So, let's start with the pain itself, right? Why does the absolute absence of a response feel so much heavier, so much more destabilizing than just a clear, direct no? I mean, a straightforward rejection stings for sure, but it has a defined shape. It's a closed door your mind can accept, process, and eventually walk away from. Silence, on the other hand, that's completely different. It's an open, echoing room.
And this brilliantly illustrates why it hurts quite so much. It really comes down to a psychological concept our sources call unfinished information. When a conversation doesn't have a clean end, your brain basically goes into absolute overdrive. It's forced to endlessly reconstruct fragments just to find some kind of meaning. Think of it like hearing a phone ringing in another room and never knowing whether the call was missed, ignored, or just impossible to answer. Or, a radio transmission that just goes to static midway through a crucial sentence. Your brain is desperate, literally hardwired, to turn that blank, silent space into a completed pattern.
Which reveals a massive, hidden psychological trap. Because we don't have the context, our minds automatically convert that missing data of silence into some really harsh self-judgment about our own worth. Nature abhors a vacuum, and honestly, so does the human ego. We take that blank, empty space and we just fill it to the brim with our own insecurities, ultimately deciding that we must have done something fundamentally wrong or that we're inherently unlovable to deserve the disappearance.
Section 1. What silence really protects. Let's look inside the ghoster's reality.
Okay, let's completely flip the angle for a second. Instead of focusing on what it feels like to be ghosted, let's look at what this disappearance is actually doing for the person who vanishes. It almost always comes down to a primal urge to escape. Whether it's discomfort from an awkward chat, guilt about disappointing you, fear of your anger, feeling a total loss of control, not wanting to put in the effort, or just sheer emotional overload. Just like physically pulling your hand back from a hot stove or panicking in deep water, ghosting is an instinctual reflex-level escape from intense, immediate discomfort. It's basically a panic response to relational depth.
So, the absolute crucial point is captured perfectly right here. Removing the conversation does not remove the consequence. It only removes the experience of witnessing it. It's exactly like turning away from a mirror so you don't have to look at the face staring back at you. The old, if I don't see it, it didn't happen defense. Ghosting allows a person to keep a perfectly clean self-image without ever having to feel like the bad guy who caused another person pain.
Let's see how these trade-offs actually build up. When someone is desperately protecting their own comfort, silence gets them out of the conflict, sure, but the cost? It leaves you in a state of deep confusion. When they protect their effort by avoiding a hard conversation, they successfully dodge the work, but they transfer that emotional burden entirely onto you. The thing to remember here is that ghosting is rarely a calculated, malicious attack designed to ruin your week. Rather, it is a sloppy defense mechanism against distress that unfortunately invoices the emotional cost directly to you.
Section 2. The mechanics of a disappearance. Here is how ghosting actually happens.
We've got the why now, so let's shift to the how. We need to understand that ghosting doesn't usually happen with one sudden dramatic evil decision. It's way more like a sliding door of micro-choices. First, maybe their interest fades just a tiny bit, then discomfort rises when your message pops up. Ignoring that notification feels instantly rewarding, so they delay. But you see, that delay creates a wider distance, and then shame appears. Feeling bad about the delay makes contact even harder. That tiny initial delay turns into a habit, and eventually, the suffocating shame of that original delay seals the permanent silence.
And, we can't ignore the environment we're all swimming in. Add in text messages, DMs, and those endless dating apps, they act like an elevator with a highly accessible, incredibly tempting door close button. Our modern architecture of communication doesn't make humans fundamentally worse, it just makes avoidance incredibly convenient. Walking away can be done with a simple swipe at almost zero immediate cost. Because it's also frictionless, this avoidance takes on a few different shapes. You might experience the slow fade, where they just kind of ease out without directness, or the sudden stop, where a threshold is crossed and avoidance wins instantly. There's even partial ghosting, keeping you at arm's length without clean closure, or context-specific ghosting, where they vanish only when the emotional stakes get too high. But while these surface behaviors might look totally different, the underlying engine is exactly the same, reducing emotional obligation. It's literally like leaving dirty dishes in the sink. You aren't actually solving the problem of the dishes, you're just postponing the friction of scrubbing them.
Imagine one single non-action creating two totally different realities. Picture a busy recruiter ignoring a student's follow-up email. It's the exact same non-event, but it is experienced by two totally different nervous systems. For the recruiter, ignoring that email provides a momentary, sweet relief from a task they just didn't want to do. But the student? They experience unresolved ambiguity and start spiraling with anxious questions. Same exact silence, two wildly different worlds.
Section 3. The hidden trade-off. Let's talk about cost-shifting behavior.
This brings us to a hidden trade-off our sources call cost-shifting behavior. Ghosting solves a highly local, immediate problem for the sender, while creating a massive, lingering problem for the receiver. In fact, this right here is probably the biggest takeaway of this entire explainer. Ghosting happens when a person finds directness more emotionally expensive than disappearance. There is always an internal threshold, and once that threshold is crossed, the emotional friction of being honest simply outweighs the ease of vanishing.
Section 4. Interpretive clarity, changing how you see ghosting.
So what are we supposed to do with all this information? Well, it unlocks something incredibly powerful called interpretive clarity. It literally changes how you see and respond to ghosting. Because we can now see ghosting as a predictable system of threshold pressure and low-friction avoidance, you can finally separate what actually happened from what your mind fears it means. You are no longer required to fill in the missing data with guesswork about your own unworthiness. You can cut the cord, drop the anchor, and respond with steadiness instead of spiraling into self-doubt.
Let's end on this thought, and I want you to really sit with this question for a second. Now that you know silence is just an avoidance pattern, a reflex really, and not a personal verdict on your true value, how will you let go of the meaning you've given it? The very moment you stop treating silence as some profound mystery about your own worth, it completely loses its power to control you. Thanks for joining me to figure this out.